The challenges that we feel here are certainly being felt across the globe. And while it has been jarring, to say the least, for the planet, it's been a bit of a reprieve, a break from the relentless human activity that has led to pollution and plants and animals dying at an alarming rate. Before the pandemic began, there was a startling report that caught our eye. A UN agency claimed that pollution would need to be cut in half in order to save our remaining wildlife. Well, before COVID-19 stopped us all in our tracks, our Maggie Rulli traveled around the globe speaking with scientists. And after the onset of COVID-19, our team asked, is there a link between what's being called the sixth extinction and pandemics? Here's what she learned.
As humans, we feel the impact of this pandemic shutting down city after city. Its deafening silence growing louder with each shuttered airport, museum, bustling tourist destination that's now left empty. But the planet feels something different. Without people flying and driving, pollution levels across Europe are dropping. In some places by as much as half in just the first week they went on lockdown. Satellite images over China earlier this year show a dramatic change in air quality after that country came to a standstill. It's a glimpse into a planet without humans, without deforestation, mining, drilling, traffic, travel. Scientists say our actions are one of the biggest threats to the planet and its other animals and plants, some even connecting them to the threat of pandemics.
We bring wild animals closer to us when we disrupt ecosystems, and with them come viruses, because all of the wild animals in all the jungles and swamps in the world carry their own viruses. And those viruses, some of them are potentially very dangerous to us.
Even before our lives were changed by COVID-19, across the planet, ecosystems have been being disrupted on a scale like we've never seen in modern times. In Antarctica, 20% of its ice melting in just days during an unprecedented heat wave. In our oceans, roughly half the world's coral reefs have been lost in the last 30 years. Our rainforests, which once grew over 14% of the land on Earth, now cover only 6%. And with this loss of land, another dramatic toll. A global phenomenon. Up to 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction. A staggering 40% of insects under threat. And scientists believe it could all happen within the next few decades.
I think it was the understanding that the extinction rates that are ongoing right now are so much higher than we thought they were. That's phenomenal. So put that in context, there's only 8 million known species on the Earth. So if we're going to cause an extinction of 1 million of them, that is a really significant impact on the plant and animal life on the planet.
It's a threat so serious, biodiversity loss is now considered one of the biggest existential threats to the human race, next to climate change and nuclear weapons.
Humans are causing this, and it really is catastrophic. We're just now beginning to see how catastrophic since the 1500s, when humans really started launching their assault on the planet. We've just had around 300 extinctions, but the number of species that are threatened with extinction has exploded in the last few years.
A recent study shows as much as 50% of the number of animals that once shared the Earth with us are already gone, as are billions of populations. That government study, published in a peer-reviewed science journal, doesn't mince words. They call it a biological annihilation that represents a frightening assault on the foundations of human civilization.
The way species come together to form habitats and ecosystems, and how they build on each other, and the kinds of services those ecosystems provide to people, we're becoming more and more aware how much humans depend on these ecosystems and their functioning. And as we unravel the web of life, take one species after another away, we're actually eating away at the basic functions that support human life on Earth, and that's really alarming.
While extinction is nothing new, scientists say the rate at which species are dying off is unprecedented. Recent estimates put the current extinction rate at more than 1,000 times higher than normal. leading many scientists to say we are at the beginning of the 6th mass extinction.
When you get rates of extinction that high, you begin to get into a mass extinction. It's really significant, and we haven't seen this in the history of keeping records.
In the last 500 million years, there have been 5 of these catastrophic extinction events, when the majority of the species on Earth disappeared in the blink of a geological eye. Those extinctions were usually due to catastrophic global events or widespread environmental changes. But today, this so-called 6th mass extinction is not being caused by some asteroid. Most scientists say it's us. From the clothes we wear to the cars we drive, the trees we cut down to the fossil fuels we've used, the food we consume to the houses we build, the vacations we take to the face scrubs we buy. On a day-to-day basis, many leading scientists say humans are the single most dangerous threat to this biodiversity crisis.
It's just a big call to Earth and to humanity everywhere. And we actually need to do something about it now. We're not on a sustainable pathway, and we're certainly on a pathway that is going to undermine the health and well-being of our children.
And we don't have to wait and see what the consequences could be. We're living them. As the worst pandemic the world has seen in a century rips around the globe, scientists say the blame lays in part with us.
It's part of a pattern that reflects things that we are doing.
In 2012, David Quammen wrote about the likelihood of a novel coronavirus starting in an animal and spreading around the world in his book Spillover, Animal Infections and the Next Human Pandemic. He says things like urban sprawl, pesticides, international trade, all of these new developments have altered ecosystems and crushed biodiversity. In the process, viruses are often let loose.
The choices that we're making in terms of what we eat, what we wear, how much we travel, what sort of consumer goods, including consumer electronics, we buy, how many children we have, all of those things are putting pressure on the natural world. And when we do that, we bring wild animals closer to us.
The CDC estimates that about 3/4 of new human diseases originate in animals. Ebola, SARS, bird flu, and now COVID-19. It's believed all started as pathogens crossing from animals to humans.
This is not the last. Another spillover, more spillovers of viruses from wild animals into humans, I would say, are inevitable as long as we keep doing what we're doing, multiplying and consuming and pushing against the rest of the world of nature.
Researchers say we can see this push happening on a massive scale right before our eyes. Before this pandemic, we have been tracking the effects of biodiversity loss across the globe.
Oh my God! Oh my God! This is apocalyptic. This is in the middle of the day.
Holy.
Just this past winter, we watched as parts of Australia ignited, sparking months of raging wildfires. The wind and heat and flames are really starting to pick up. You can hear everything burning behind you, that smoke coming off, stinging the eyes. The heat radiating off this flames is so intense right now. Everything along this highway is just going up in flames. More than 30 million acres left charred. Australia is home to some of the oldest geological features in the world and to some of the most unique and extraordinarily diverse wildlife. The kangaroo, the wombat, the wallaby, and the koala bear. Or at least it has been.
It's scary when you think of how many are lost, and there's still so much you can learn from them.
Oh, we have lost thousands. Thousands of koalas, thousands of so many other species. It's just criminal. This is the worst event this country's ever seen, without a doubt. Horrific.
Shane Flanagan's the director at the Koala Hospital in New South Wales.
See here, there's burns there, but they've all healed. That was all red raw, and it's all growing back nicely now. So.
She and her team have been on the front lines of those historic wildfires in Australia. She says she's seen how record-breaking temperatures and months of severe drought, fueled in part by climate change, have ripped through Australia's delicate ecosystem. Her hospital has taken in dozens of koalas that have been burned or lost their habitat, like Paul.
He's a very shy little koala. Oh, there you are.
Paul went viral after being saved back in November at a nature reserve. He was named after the human who rescued him.
Hi, Paul.
See how he's lost hair?
Yeah.
And all the fur's really all growing back.
Paul is one of the lucky ones. Shane says even if they can get to animals in time, often their burns are just too severe.
Do you think it's a warning call for Americans?
Yes.
Yeah, how so?
Yes. Well, we've got to change the way we live. You know, we've got to stop being such big consumers. Mother Earth's very, very angry with all of us, and this is what's happening.
Now, she says she fears some species, like the koala, may never recover.
Up until when these fires happened, I never thought that would be a possibility. But if we have another few seasons like this, you know, over the next few summers, heaven help the populations out there. And I say shame, Australia, shame. Not on our watch though, eh, Amanda?
Australia was a fiery wake-up call on climate change. The problem there only made worse by issues with land management and arson. Images of what's believed to be the world's oldest continent burning went viral. But scientists say climate change isn't the only threat to biodiversity.
There are a number of things that cause this, including habitat destruction, pollution, over-harvesting. And so that, along with the growing threat of climate change, means that more and more species are threatened with extinction now than ever before in the history of humans.
As the human population swells to an estimated 11 billion by the end of the century, more and more people are competing for more and more of Earth's precious and dwindling resources. Often caught in the crosshairs, unique ecosystems and their one-of-a-kind wildlife. Even the birthplace of evolution is not immune. The Galapagos Islands, an otherworldly landscape filled with wildlife so unique it can border on the bizarre. Animals only found on these islands: the marine iguana, the Galapagos giant tortoise, and penguin. It was here that Charles Darwin was inspired to write his theory of evolution. But now, the islands that spawned Darwin's survival of the fittest could be facing a fight for survival themselves, challenged by their own popularity. 21st century threats like bucket list tourism and plastic pollution are threatening their very existence. Before this outbreak, the number of visitors exploding from just 5,050 years ago to more than 250,000 tourists visiting the islands just last year. Many here to see those same unique animals that inspired Darwin, like the blue-footed boobies and the always popular, overly friendly sea lions.
Tourism is a double-edged sword. It can be good and it can be bad. So let's make sure that we manage tourism the best possible way, and we use tourism as a conservation tool. The Galapagos is conserved more than 95% of its biodiversity. And the reason for that is partially or mostly because of the tourism we have here. Tourists become a public constituency that defends the conservation of Galapagos.
The conservation efforts are strong here. 97% of the islands are off limits to the public.
Please never go outside of the trail.
Visits are hyper-organized, and while in the park, tourists must be with a professional guide the entire time.
Can we bring it home?
No, we cannot bring anything from here. Those are Galapagos National Park rules.
Despite these extraordinary efforts, even a place called the Cradle of Biodiversity cannot escape the biodiversity crisis.
When you come to experience the vast beauty of the Galapagos, you probably don't stop to think about the enormous amount of trash that tourists and locals alike create.
Boating around the Galapagos with Juan Pablo, a marine scientist at the Galapagos Science Center, we see the land that these unique animals need to survive now covered in plastics.
Every single thing that floats eventually have the potentiality to arrive here. In the past was wood, now it's plastic.
So where does all this plastic, all this trash come from?
I mean, it comes from everywhere, from the States, it can come from Europe, it can come from Japan, it comes from everywhere.
On land, the amount is multiplied.
Seeing it up close, you see just, there's so many different types of trash in here, types of plastic. You have like a hard hat,
Yeah.
gasoline containers, some type of bottling container,
Yeah.
plastic bottle, plastic bottle, plastic bottle.
Bottles, that's pretty much roughly the 80% of the debris that you find in the Galapagos. Bottles. One way or another, plastics is forever. Even though you do the best thing to recycling, it's gonna be a little bit of release of microplastics.
Yeah.
That is gonna end up in the air or in the ocean.
And what exactly are microplastics?
I want to show you that. I want to
Yeah.
actually show you what is microplastics.
Oh, it's like, oh God, you can see it coming off in the air even.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we can make, you see this?
Yeah,
so you
can see the dust of blue.
Yeah, it
oh my gosh, look on your hand.
And that's the real problem.
Yeah.
That's something that we don't know how to avoid. Because we can easily clean this macro debris.
But how do you clean up dust?
Exactly, how you clean dust. So the best thing to do is attack this problem from the source before I arrive here, because once I arrive here, it's probably too late to do something about it.
Because once it's here, it means it's already in our oceans and in our animals. There are more than 51 trillion microplastic particles in the ocean. That's more than 500 times the number of stars in the Milky Way. Fish end up eating these microplastics, and we end up eating the fish. Pollution from these plastics and toxins, overfishing, and warming waters are wreaking havoc on marine environments. It's estimated at least 40% have already been severely altered. And for the islands, often called the living laboratory of evolution, the stakes have never been higher.
How do you change the minds of people when we've all gotten so used to this disposable lifestyle?
They need to see this. They need. I think that's important that that everybody actually understand that the most pristine places in this planet are like this, full of plastic.
You have a single planet. There's no planet B, okay? And you have places in the many different countries that are unique, that are fantastic, places that are so beautiful and so important that they go beyond the political boundaries. And Galapagos is one of them. Politically, yes, Galapagos belongs to Ecuador. Emotionally and in terms of heritage, it belongs to the world.
But it's not only these exquisite remote parts of the world that are under threat. To see the beginnings of what some scientists are calling the sixth mass extinction, we just have to look in our own backyard. The United Kingdom, where I now live, is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, with 1 in 7 species facing extinction and more than half in decline. Home of the Industrial Revolution, the UK has spent the last 200 years or so altering its landscape, building cities, draining wetlands, and turning forests into farmland. Isabella Tree and her husband, Charles Burrell, inherited the Napa estate from his family. They had been farming on its 3,500 acres for generations. But she says despite working at it for nearly 2 decades, they could not get the old wetlands to produce enough food to make a profit.
Finally, after about 17 years of trying and battering our heads against a brick wall with farming, we were £1.5 million in debt and realised we couldn't go on. We began to look at something that would work with the land rather than battling against it all the time. And that's really when we stumbled on rewilding.
She says the concept's quite simple. You pretty much do nothing and just let the land turn back to being wild.
The year after we had restored the land, the soil, we just walked out into a landscape that felt completely different. We were kicking up common blue butterflies and grasshoppers everywhere you went. The sound of insects, it was something we hadn't even known we'd been missing as farmers. And of course, when the insects come back, so do the birds. You know, watching wild animals, you know, pass our windows. And that moment of just hearing the insects, we had travelled, you know, all over the world to look at wildlife. And we'd never once thought about what we were doing in our own backyard and that we should be teeming with wildlife where we lived.
After starting small, they went bigger, letting more and more land go wild and bringing in larger animals.
In all our imaginings of what pre-human impact Europe would have looked like, what the landscape would have looked like, we've completely forgotten about the huge herds of roaming animals that would have been here. All these animals would have been out there in the landscape, driving a very complex, shifting, dynamic kaleidoscope of habitats. So if you put these animals back into the landscape, let them drive the system, then extraordinary things begin to happen. Biodiversity comes back.
Walking with her on a rainy winter day before the pandemic on the English countryside, we saw wild pigs, foxes, and birds. She says that's just the beginning.
Within 20 years, we've become one of the most significant areas in Britain for some of our rarest species. These incredibly rare species that have found us because the habitat has returned. But more than that, we've just got this extraordinary biomass of species. So if you go out into the scrub on a spring morning at dawn, the sound of the birds is so loud, literally your stomach is reverberating. You can feel it in your lungs.
The Napa State now offers safaris on their land, and summer bookings are already nearly sold out. Rewilding might not be the solution for everyone. After all, the world still needs farms to produce enough food for humans to survive. But Isabella says the two can work together.
Rewilding and regenerative farming will work hand in hand. If we're going to recover ecosystems on which all of biodiversity depends, including our own species, we've got to be more generous with nature. We've got to give half our landmass across the planet back to nature. And I think rewilding is how you do that.
As a planet, we still have a long way to go. The UK may have been one of the first to industrialize, but the rest of the globe soon followed. Right now, it's estimated that just 25% of the land is free from human activity. And by 2050, it's predicted that number will drop to 10%. But as Isabella writes in her book Wilding, she's discovered it doesn't have to be that way.
What we've shown here is that nature will bounce back if you let it, if you put the right drivers in place and just allow it to happen.
This pandemic has already showed us that animals will return. Some animals emerging from nearby forests across the globe, taking over the streets they once shared with humans. So why should you care about the biodiversity crisis? As scientists around the world scramble to find a cure for COVID-19, many may be looking to the natural world for help. About 50% of modern drugs have been developed from natural products. And with 1 in 5 plant species under threat of extinction, the world could lose its cure for the next virus to biodiversity loss before it's even been discovered. That's why leading scientists say now is the time to act. In a United Nations Agreement on Nature, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity calls for almost a third of the world's oceans and land to be protected by 2030. An aggressive goal, they say, is our best shot at reversing biodiversity loss and ensuring the survival of humanity.
Understanding that the future is in our hands, in everybody's hands. We can't leave it to politicians, and we've got to fight to change.
I think maybe 5 years ago I would have been maybe a little more pessimistic. But one of the things I've been really so happy about in the last 2 to 3 years is how much attention the decline of nature is getting.
The sixth mass extinction may have already started, but there is still time to slow it down and to make sure that humans are not a part of it.
Put policies in place and action plans in place in 2020. We can do it together in 10 years to deliver a whole planet. It's very doable with human ingenuity. It is very doable. If you ever thought that things that you do don't matter, they absolutely matter. And I would urge you to start small, take on a few things that you could do for the planet tomorrow, take on another couple things in 2 weeks' time, and pretty soon we will be on a road to a healthier planet, a stabilized climate, and a biodiverse planet where we can all be able to see the Sumatran rhino in the future.
Maggie Bruley, ABC News, London.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.